Hey everybody, Dr. Dusa here, MTFU Longevity Podcast. Thank you for accepting my departure for a week. I needed to take a week off from everything. You know that my dear 20-year-old son slash pet dog Fozzie passed away. He went over the Rainbow Bridge, and you'll see my name tonight. It's not Dr. Michael Dusa, it's Dr. Fozzie Dusa. And Denise was saying, why the hell are you doing that? And I says, well, I got to pay homage to my dog somehow. So maybe give him a little bit of the spotlight here. And also I wanted to mention our good friend of the podcast, also man on my advisory board, John Defendis. You all know him as one of the two icons of bodybuilding from years ago. 1988 Mr. USA, ranked by Flex Magazine as the fourth hardest, most intense trainer ever in history. His dear father did pass away last night, 95 years old, World War II veteran. You know, I really hate losing those guys because we have less and less. There's only like maybe 300,000 less left, I think. And I always thank parents like that for producing children like John, because those are the people that make America great. And I also say to those parents, thank you for producing good kids because they'll pay into Social Security. And me and my friend Roger here can get some eventually. So we do need some people holding sway there. My guest tonight is Roger Schwab. And of course, he was supposed to be on last week along with Roy Callender, who will be Roy Callender, by the way, Roger. You know, that carries some relevance for you, of course, from the 81 Olympia a little bit. You can talk about that in a minute. Roger's a very interesting man, and he is probably either known or interfaced or integrated with everyone in bodybuilding over many decades. In fact, he started as a trainer over 50 years ago when the term personal training was not part of the general lexicon. So, you know, he's really rooted in the pantheon of people who built physique. Yeah, I might even apply the term physical culturist to him. I don't know if that's going too far back. That's kind of gimmicky, kind of Steve Reevesy there a little, but he'll talk about that. He's also an author. He wrote a book called Strength of a Woman in 1997, sold 30,000 copies. And if anybody doesn't think that's a lot, the average book sells about 250 copies. My book, MTFU, sold 4,000 copies. So I'm far afield from that, but and he's done a lot of other things. He was the head judge of the IPP Pro division from 1979 to 1982, and he's got some great stories and insights, not just stories. We want to learn and have relevant information given to us about the 80 and 81 Olympia. Of course, we want to talk about Mike Mentzer, his good friend for many years, and a little bit of Ray mixed in there as well. The heavy-duty training, Mike's real diet, his type of volume training, because there's a little bit of back and forth that people go about over Mike and what he really did. But here's a man, Roger, who knew him well and trained with him regularly, and he can probably drop some clarity upon us. And also, very interesting, Roger worked closely with Arthur Jones, the creator of Nautilus. He who is described, maybe the term is eccentric in a certain way, but he did add a lot to fitness. And I think one of his sons started Hammer Strength too, right, Roger? Right. Yeah, so that's interesting as well. And you worked with him for 30 years. Roger, thank you for being here, man. And thank you for changing from a week ago to now. I appreciate it.
Nice to be with you, Michael.
How's it going down in Philadelphia?
Well, we're still here. Our virus cases are going down.
Good.
And the gyms in Philadelphia are scheduled to open August the 1st.
Wow. Oh, so they're not open yet. Wow. How long have you lived there? Have you lived there all your life?
I'm kind of a local yokel. I lived outside of Philadelphia in a small college town, Bryn Mawr, for the first 70 years of my life. And the last 5 have been in Center City. And as you know, I ran Mainline Health and Fitness, which is a big box gym, for 40 years. We really focused on sports medicine. So we did most of the rehab out of the area, and we trained people in what we considered a medically sound environment. So there was no high impact forces. It was composed of free weights and Nautilus machines and hammer machines and MedX machines, and from 2012 on, also X-Force equipment. But regardless of the tool, we tried to teach it correctly.
It definitely sounds like it was before its time, and I'm glad. And I know you're still active, and we'll talk about that. Just getting ahead of myself a little. I know both Frank Zane and Mike Mentzer are originally from. Well, I don't know if Mentzer was originally from Pennsylvania. It might have been Massachusetts, but did you know them from?
Oh, well, I knew Mike's family was from Ephrata, Pennsylvania, which was a several-hour drive, because whenever he was there, he would drive down to see me. Not me personally, because he could care less, but he came to train at Mainline Health and Fitness because we had everything that he liked, every piece of equipment that he liked to train on. So when he came down, I would train him, and the gym would kind of stop. Like if there's a couple hundred people in there, everything would come to a standstill. When Ray came, when Mike came, when the one time that Casey came, everything happened. It was electric. It was almost like being in Gold's gym for a day.
Well, we might as well start with well, how did you get into fitness anyhow? Let's just talk about that as a young guy. Or when did you start? You start when was it the teenage how to make a man out of Mac course that you ordered from the comic book type of thing?
I wish I could tell you no, but that's exactly right.
Oh, really?
I was a kid, and the first thing I started, believe it or not, was the Charles Atlas dynamic tension, which was just isometric exercises. And believe it or not, I got some results from that. And then, of course, there was Muscle Builder and Mr. America magazine, and I saw something and ordered Joe's super duper 8-week course, which he promised at the end would come with dumbbells. They never came, but the weekend exercises were kind of cool. I was a skinny kid and really looked, like I just escaped from Dachau. My mom used to say I was about 110 pounds, and didn't realize too much about genetics because my dad was about as thin as I was. But I wanted to build myself up. All I wanted to do was to play football, and I couldn't do it at that light weight. And so I eventually got myself a 110-pound York set and struck out on my own and made an awful lot of mistakes right from the beginning.
Did you end up playing football?
Well, I played at the high school level. I didn't play at the college level. I tried to be a walk-on. I wasn't anywhere good enough, but I understood by that time how to build muscles, although not in a very smart way. And the coach at the time, named Rip Engel, the assistant was a guy's name you'll know was Joe Paterno.
Oh, wow.
In 1964, I won the Pennsylvania State Olympic lifting championships. That's where my heart was in the 3 Olympic lifts at the time, the press, the snatch, and the clean and jerk. And I won, and I was a good lifter. And not because I knew anything about kinesiology at the time, but Rip Engel made me the strength training coach of the entire Penn State football team.
Yeah, that
was the start of my downfall. I'm surprised I didn't kill half these kids because I did everything wrong. John Defendus might have been able to handle all the volume I gave these guys, but they sure couldn't.
I don't know. He thinks I could handle that at the age of 56, and more scar tissue than healthy tissue. So we'll find out.
Well, Arthur Jones used to say, you don't learn from your successes, you learn from your failures. And I made enough mistakes that I eventually learned.
As long as you're not still making them today, right, Roger?
That's right.
Let me ask you a question. You started the weight training with the football team in the 64 and 65. Wasn't there resistance to that, though? Weren't they the people in the athletic world still smitten with that? You're going to get too stiff, you're going to get muscle bound and all that?
I would say, Penn State was kind of a forerunner, although I did most things wrong with these guys. The guy who took my place, Dan Riley, eventually went on to be the strength coach of the Washington Redskins. He was very successful. He has several Super Bowl rings.
Wow.
But I trained these guys 6 days a week, and these programs never work unless the head coach buys into it. And Rip Engel bought into it. He bought into weight training to get his football players stronger. And I did the old split routine at the time of upper body one day, lower body the next. The only guy who didn't follow the program was the captain of the team. His name was Bill Lenkaitis, who went on to play for the New England Patriots. And he said to me, I'm a pre-med student. I can't get in there 6 days a week.
Oh, wow.
I can train twice a week. And Michael, the one guy who made the best results on the team was Bill Lenkaitis. And I wish I could tell you, it opened my eyes to understanding the cause and effect that exercise stimulates a response, but it's the rest that allows the response. I didn't get it. I thought by some fluke he was just getting stronger than the rest of them, but he understood something I didn't.
Roger, I'm getting ahead of myself here, but that's my prerogative. I get the sense that you might postulate that the average person today overtrains.
In my look, I'm not a judge on what everybody does. I think everything works. I think barbells, machines. I was never one of the ones who criticized. If Arnold could train 6 days a week, twice a week, look at Arnold. If Mentzer could train 3 days a week, look at Mike. Genetics play a role in it, and muscle fibers play a role, and the length of a muscle plays a role, and determination plays a role. But in my thinking was longevity.
Right.
When I was 16 years old, I took a drive from Philadelphia up to York, PA, to meet one man who shaped everything for me. And his initials were JCG, John Carroll Grimmick.
Wow.
He greeted me, this young kid, on a Saturday
Roger,
morning.
can I stop you? What year was that? Do you remember the year?
Well, yeah, because I was 16, so it was 1961.
So he was maybe 60, 50.
He was a little younger, but he greeted me with a smile and a handshake that we maintained a friendship for the rest of his life. But what was really interesting to me, Michael, was that Grimmick was a great Olympic lifter, a great bodybuilder, and we stayed friends for a long period of time. Earlier than that, I met a woman out at Muscle Beach named Pudgy Stockton.
Right.
You might know her name also. She was the pioneer of women's strength training. And I got to be good friends with Reg Park over the years.
Wow.
And through Reg and Grimmick and Pudgy, as they got older, they all had injuries. John had it to both hips. I happened to meet Steve Reeves in New York for a short period of time in the early 70s, and both of his shoulders. And Reg Park neck and his shoulders, and Pudgy Stockton shoulders and her knees. They all wound up when they're older getting hurt. And that really meant a lot to me. I don't think it was so much the lifting, but it was how much lifting. And it led me to believe what Arthur Jones said, try to stimulate the greatest response with the least amount of work. Now at 75 years old, I'm fairly asymptomatic of any major problems, except for the neck injuries I got playing football when I was a kid. So to me, what worked for me was to stay healthy over these years and watch not so much the intensity of the training, but how much we trained and the impact forces indigenous to training.
Roger, I should have come down to see you and learn from you before we did this, because that's so me, and you've been around a lot longer. I defer to you because number one, anybody who's older than me, I give them respect, because you hear the young kids say, oh, you got to earn respect. I'm like, no. If somebody's lasted longer than me, they get my respect. But the fact that you've accrued all of this information and you could leverage it. We do have a question I'm going to address now from someone because you're on the topic. I'm curious. I have all of Mike Mentzer's books and have tried the program in his final book, co-authored by John Little. I didn't get the results that I wanted. It wasn't due to lack of intensity. I work out to failure and many times until I'm nauseous. I'm 53 and do not use high volume training, rather a modified HIIT training similar to Mentzer's program in Heavy Duty 1. Roger, what are your thoughts for HIIT for those of us over 50? Thank you.
Well, in my opinion, HIIT, like high intensity training, is the most medically sound way to train because of the less volume and the less impact forces on the joints. But it's very specific what I believe in. Robert Kennedy, who's a personal friend of mine for so many years, a wonderful man,
Great guy,
who was the publisher of Muscle Mag, came up with the idea of what he called pre-exhaustion. Pre-exhaust training was to, instead of doing a heavy compound movement, to do a exercise that isolated a muscle structure as well as possible before you perform the compound movement. So take a chest work, let's just say, an arm cross with a machine isolates the pectoral and the related deltoid structure by working the muscle throughout its full range of motion. Then if you immediately go to a bench press, the fatigued chest muscles will go deeper into fatigue by bringing in the fresh tricep muscles. And to me, yes, you handle less weight in the compound movement, but the intensity of both of these exercises together lowers the forces than if you had just done a heavy resistance with a compound movement, if that makes sense. And that is the way that I recommend people to train if you have machines. If you're training with free weights, I don't think the single joint movements are as efficient, as effective, and as stimulating as with machines. So to the hit person who's questioning on this, keep doing what you're doing, get as strong as you can in a safe way. And if you're not getting stronger, question either your intensity of effort or the amount of times a week you're training. Judge everything by your strength increases. If you're not getting stronger, put a couple more days between your workouts.
What do you, I'm sorry, what do you think about Dorian Yates, who, high intensity Mentzer denizen, who says you can either train hard or train long, you can't do both? You're kind of saying that, aren't you?
Yeah, I don't identify with Dorian because he got so freaking strong. And but between 1992 and 1993, he probably made more progress in that 1 year than any physique that I've seen in the course of my 50 plus years watching bodybuilding. You
Wow.
know that, Michael. You know what happened between 1992 and 1993.
Oh, yeah.
Whatever he did, he grew like a weed.
It was something.
I can't go there because my interest in the sport diminished after I left it. I was involved in the golden age, which to me ended in the 1980s. But I did come back. Jim Mannion's a close friend of mine. We came up at the same time with Wayne DeMilla and John Balick. And I went to see Dorian in the 1993 and 1994 Mr. Olympia. And he was head and shoulders the biggest, most massive man that at that time I'd ever seen. He paid the consequences, though. His right bicep got torn, his left tricep, one of his quads. You pay the price by that heavy lifting. And in my opinion, he would have gotten the same results if he had pre-exhausted a single joint movement before those heavy compound movements. Now, I'm not an expert. My muscles are not as big as Dorian Yates. But if we're talking about longevity and being able to continue working out in a sport that you really love, it's really a shame if you're on the shelf when you're hurt.
I've got a question that's kind of applicable here and now by John Ziccarelli. I'll get to in a second. But as far as you look at Ronnie Coleman, and he always 800-pound squat, and he did 2 reps. To this day, he's just chagrined that he didn't do 3 reps. That being said, whether that's true or not, because he has chronic pain now, and the young kids I don't think they understand what chronic pain is. Chronic meaning it's always there, so much so that it's a part of you, and it can change your personality. It can really grind you down to nothing. But do you think someone like Ronnie, and I know there's no way you can assert this as a fact, but that could he be gotten the same results with 600 pounds versus 800 pounds? Is there a law of diminishing returns at a certain point with the amount of weight?
I'm not so sure that the skeleton was meant to have that kind of enormous poundages sitting on your shoulders, on your cervical spine or your traps, even if you're tremendously well developed. And in my opinion, especially heavy leg work, repetitions should be higher. That way you're decreasing the forces, but you're still maintaining the intensity. That being said, this is Roger Schwab speaking, and I am not, ever was in the business of telling somebody of that stature who did, who realizes physical potential, how to train or how not to train. I've primarily, the people who've come to me, I've told them my opinion. You're having me on your show, so you're coming for my opinion. But I wouldn't come out to you, Michael, and tell you how to train. I can tell you what I've seen over 50 or 60 years of watching people. I sat in the last row of 1962 and watched Larry Scott win the IFBB Mr. America contest.
Wow.
And rose to being the head judge of the IFBB. So I was really interested in the sport. I saw them all train. I saw Arnold train and Boyer train and Corney train, and Frank Zane. I saw them all, and Mike and Casey and all the rest of them. And they all had their own nuances. They all had their own way of doing things. I'm not criticizing anybody.
No. And believe me, I'm not trying to evoke that.
No, I don't think you are. But I'm just making the point that everything works.
Right.
Everything might not work. You have to find what works best for you. But the point that I'm trying to make is, if you really love what you're doing, being on the shelf and being hurt is really going to frustrate you.
Oh, yeah.
So if you're doing heavy squats and you're feeling it in your neck or your lumbar spine or your knees, it's trying to tell you something. And working through pain is not always the smartest thing to do. You might want to work around it or choose a substitute that might not stimulate the response that you're looking for, but keeps you in the gym.
Roger, I like to consider myself a man of science and the scientific method, but if a patient comes in and they do this and they say, "Hey, doc, this hurts," I say, don't do that. You're not looking to hurt. You're looking to stimulate or get into discomfort, not pain. Let's go to this question here, John Ziccarelli. It's a little off the wall. If this is off topic, not appropriate, I apologize. But when Arnold entered into the Olympia, so-called last minute in 1980, was Mentzer as upset as the pictures suggest? And now here's his even more silly question. Thank you, John Ziccarelli. Who gets the better of it if those two fought backstage?
Well, to answer John, thanks for the question. To answer your first question, Mike was not only not upset, but he said to me, and he said in print, not only am I going to win this contest, but I'm going to beat Arnold Schwarzenegger also.
I read that. He said that to you? He said that to you?
He said it to me right after the contest, which is one of the last few times that we spoke. Because that contest to Mike was that was really changed him. It's quite a shame. Very bright guy, and he put everything he had into that contest. It was very bitter, and he was never quite the same, as everybody who knows him would tell you. And I remember Mike Mentzer up until that September night in 1980. He was a real good guy, a real intellectual guy, a smart guy, and a guy who really cared for people.
What if he had won the Mr. Olympia that night? What would have changed on the landscape potentially, do you think?
Oh, I think his whole life would have changed, in my opinion.
No, I'm not just for him, but for would bodybuilding have been different?
1980 and 1981, of which I have recollections of both, as you know, the IFBB, you were concerned that Arnold won. Oh my gosh, Boyer and Frank Zane and Callender aren't going to compete the next year, and what's going to happen to the sport? But a year later, it was back again, and Mr. Olympia was as popular as ever. That's, of course, I was the head judge of the most infamous contest in the history of the sport. And I guess I've been interviewed about that contest at least 100 times by you and John Hansen and Ricky Wayne and Randy Roach. And it was there. And so I think in my opinion, Michael, the sport changed in the 90s when mass became so important that a Frank Zane of 1979 at his zenith couldn't have competed, even in the shape that he was in. And even maybe Arnold at his very best, at Arnold's very best, was in New York in 1974. If you don't think so, ask him.
Yeah.
He let me know that straight to my face when at his house one day, he said to me, I said to him, I think your best was 1973. And he looked at me the way only Arnold can look at somebody and said, you are wrong. And you know what? If you look at the pictures, Arnold was right. But 1993, when mass became so tremendous, I turned off. And in 2000 plus, with the oil and the synthol and the body and things like that, I mean, how can you have interest in this stuff? No. Take a look at the shoulders of some of these men. Yeah. You telling me that lateral raises and overhead presses, no matter how hard you train, are going to build shoulders like that? Not to my way of thinking.
Well, not only that, Roger, how about the fact that you don't see any division of the fibers or separation of the muscle groups or, the fingers in the back of the delta? No, there's these big,
round bulbs.
Yeah, bulbs of muscle, but there's none of those little things moving around. In fact, you mentioned Larry Scott. Frank Zane said when he was backstage, I think Zane might have won the America the first time Scott won the Olympia, and Zane was he couldn't believe when he got close to Scott how much detail was in every little muscle. Like you can't really appreciate it in the pictures.
Well, you're right. I happened to be backstage when Scott won the Olympia in 1965. And of course, you could not take your eyes off of his arms and delts. But if you took a look at his calves, they looked like they could cut a piece of paper. They were as sharp as can be. But whose eyes ever traveled down that far?
Yeah, that's true.
1966, he was not quite as sharp as he was in 65. And Harold Poole you had to see Harold Poole was really the first, in my opinion, in 1963 in Harrisburg, PA, when he did not win, when he lost to Vern Weaver for the AAU Mr. America, was the most massively muscular man for his time. He was only 19 years old.
Right.
And you couldn't believe a young Harold Poole. He was even better. He was very upset when he lost to Scott. Also in that contest was Chuck Sipes.
Right.
You had to see Chuck Sipes if you wanted to see a muscular man whose skin was so tight. And he was a beautiful man, a great, great guy. I only spent a few moments with him, really talking, a couple hours backstage, but he was a gentle giant. And
also wasn't Earl Maynard in that? Because Earl's going to be on the show next week, actually.
Yeah, Earl Maynard won the Mr. World or whatever in 65 in New York. He was a great physique. He came over to the States with Ricky Wayne.
Right.
And in my opinion, Wayne and him were neck and neck in that contest.
No kidding.
They gave it to Earl. He was taller than Ricky was, but you had to see Ricky in person too. He was just magnificent.
He had some great arms.
Oh my God. He had tremendous triceps and biceps. That bicep of his went all the way into the elbow, man. There was no space there. You know,
people forget, and there were greats many years ago. It's almost like the kids now, they consider those guys the football players who played with the leather helmets without the masks. They didn't have any of the, or the drugs or it's just not big enough. You see pictures of Arnold, the kids Photoshop him as though he's always not good enough or not big enough. But let me ask you, could you go back to how you developed your relationship with Mike Mentzer, and he stayed with you for a bit, and some of his eating habits? And, you know, you saw him one day in the bathroom or at the locker, and he was probably at his very best at that very moment. Then he said he might have flattened out a little for the Olympia. I mean, some of the food things and whatnot.
In the early 1970s, after 1971, Mike placed 10th in the Mr. America contest that Casey Viator won that year at 19 years old. And after he placed 10th in that contest, he decided he wanted to go to med school, and he wanted to be, of all things, a psychiatrist. And he was living down in Maryland. And a friend of his and a friend of mine was a psychiatrist who introduced the two of us. And I took the journey down to Maryland, a gym called the Spartan Gym, and shook hands with Mike Mentzer in 1972. He had, you know, hair all over his body, on his chest and his legs, and he wasn't anywhere near contest shape. And at the time, he didn't have designs on being Mr. America. But it was a mostly Nautilus gym. And we set about working out that day. And quite frankly, the workout that we went through that day was very, very similar to every single workout that we shared together in the future. So a couple of times in 1972, I went back to Maryland, and each time he was in slightly better shape. In 1973 and 1974, I believe, he went down to DeLand, Florida, and trained with Casey for the summer of 1974. I believe
was that Arthur Jones's complex?
Yes. Now, John Little could answer this better than I could. But I wrote about this in Iron Man magazine. That John interviewed me for 2 issues of Iron Man right after Mike passed away. And I recalled to him Mike and Casey training 3 days a week on Nautilus machines. That's all they had in DeLand with Arthur at that time anyway. And about 20 sets total workout 3 days a week. Now, I knew how Mike trained, and I knew how Casey trained. And how they could do that doesn't seem like a volume in John Defendus definition of volume, but 20 sets on these Nautilus machines without any rest 3 times a week was really, really difficult to get through, but they did it. And at the time, Mike would write back to me that he was on a high carb diet. And he said, you wouldn't believe it, and he says, we eat white bread, we eat peanut butter, real good peanut butter nonetheless, and tuna fish.
All peanut butter. All peanut butter is good peanut butter.
Okay. I'm not talking about Jiffy with all the salt and sugar, but the good stuff. Anyway.
Hey, Roger, you know what I look like these days? I look like a newly opened jar of peanut butter, nice and smooth.
And anyway, he said he was stimulating great response, and that led him to decide to compete in the 1975 IFBB Mr. America, which he did in New York, and I accompanied him up to New York for that contest.
Oh, wow.
Which was won by Robbie Robinson, if I believe.
Yes.
And believe me, Robbie Robinson deserved it. Robbie Robinson was, in 1975, an amazing physique. And in my opinion, nobody ever duplicated the front double bicep the way Robbie Robinson did it. Subsequently, Mike won the contest, I think in 1976, a year later.
Yeah, it was IFBB America, and it was Navarrete won the tall, Ray came in second, Mike won the medium, Danny Padilla won short, and Mike won the overall. So,
yeah, and I believe Danny won the following year in 1977.
Right.
So Mike really made a tremendous improvement from 75 to 76. But during that time the thing is, during that time, when he came to train with me at my gym, he still did the 3 times a week workout. Now, in his books that he published At the time, he was doing a split routine, more in the lines of pushing movements one day, pulling movements the next day, or 2 days later, and then legs. So he would do an every other day split. And I have no doubt that he did. But when he came to see me, he didn't. And he didn't through every time that he came down to our gym. He trained the whole body. When Casey came, he trained the whole body. When Ray came, he trained the whole body. This is the way they did it. They didn't listen to me. I wasn't going to tell them how to train. This is what they wanted, and this is what they got. Now, they might have wanted it that way because we had the full gamut of every Nautilus machine at the time ever made, and it might have been so that they just liked using that equipment and didn't want to miss out on some of the machines they liked. But that's how they trained. Now, in 1979, Mike was now living in California and working for Joe. Well, Casey moved out from Florida, left Arthur Jones, and went out to California and trained with Ray and Mike at Gold's Gym. And they started on a program, Michael, of heavy compound movements. And Casey thrived, and Mike got hurt almost immediately. Some people can withstand the forces of heavy compound movements and partial reps, and some people can't. Doesn't make one better than the other.
Right.
It means their anatomical structure, bone socket of the shoulder, might be formed differently in one person than it is the next. Might be a tighter fit in there. There might be less room for error. But whatever it was, Mike got hurt again. And Mike went back to his regular type of training.
Roger, I'm sorry. Do you know what his injury was? Was it a knee or his back?
Shoulder? It was a shoulder injury.
Oh, okay.
Both shoulders.
Wow.
And if you took a look at the pictures of Mike and Ray and Casey training on these very, very heavy partials.
I remember.
475 pounds in incline presses. Some people can tolerate it. Some people will grow like a weed. Some people will grow but get hurt. Mike got hurt almost immediately. To me, I'm not happy he got hurt, but I think he learned his lesson. Thus, when he stayed with me at my apartment previous to the 1980 Mr. Olympia contest, he was back to training 3 times a week. The only barbell exercise he did was squats. And again, the whole gym would be there and everybody would watch Mike train. And what you brought up, Michael, about the locker room, Mike always carried a slight bit of body fat below his navel. Bodybuilders call that water.
Yeah.
It was body fat.
Right.
In this day, in August, I believe it was late July or August in 1980, there was veins coming vertically and there was no zilcho fat. And he was full and ripped up and he was in the best shape of his life.
Right. Can I stop you right there? You're going to continue there, but I want to backtrack because you mentioned the 1979. He did go in the Olympia. And, you know, of course, Arnold made that barb about, you know, you lost because your stomach was.
That's not why he lost.
No, but Mike did tell Zane after, you know, at the victory party, Mike went up to Zane and he said, listen, it's not your fault that you won. It was kind of like what did Mike really feel about, you know, taking second to Zane?
Mike, if you saw Mike's diary, he had everything down perfectly, in his opinion, to win the 1979 Mr. Olympia. And he came in at a heavy body weight. He was probably 30 pounds heavier than Frank. And I was there and I was a judge. Mike was ahead up until the pose down. And for some reason that he might have told me the reason why, but I think it was nerves. In the pose down, he threw his poses so quickly, so fast, and Zane was so polished that Zane's muscularity and experience outweighed Michael's size and density.
Wow.
And Zane won the contest. And I don't think anybody objected to that. And Mike was tremendously upset. But
actually, Roger, you know who objected when Zane got interviewed by Arnold backstage, and Arnold said, "How's it feel?" And Zane said, "It feels about as good as when I beat you back in '68."
Yeah, well, Zane did beat Arnold when he first came over in IFBB, Mr. Universe. I think it was way back in '67, something like that. But Arnold, Arnold just reached his zenith 7 years later in '74. Certainly not in 1980.
No.
So Mike thought he should have won in '79, and when he left me in '80 to go to Australia.
Roger, before you go there, he did stay with you. I just want to, if you could recount how he would.
Stories are true about the tuna fish and mayonnaise.
Yeah.
7-grain toast. Those stories are true. This is what he ate. He rode his bike to and from the gym all over Bryn Mawr. Everybody knew who he was. This guy with these massive calves and shorts riding around. He would sunbathe up on our roof. He was just tremendous at the time. He looked great. His metabolism was fast. He didn't eat junk food. To me, the tuna fish sandwich, I mean, I didn't see anything out of the ordinary about it. He ate carbs. He ate oatmeal. He ate tuna fish sandwiches. And he had protein drinks. He might have drank some Rio H. Blair protein and cream. He was all over the lot, but his metabolism was fast, Michael, and he was adding no fat at all. He was ready to kill. And I'll tell you, I watched him train. His pecs were full. He was big and muscular. The pictures that I saw from Sydney, he had flattened out a bit. I don't know if he was dehydrated.
Roger, I've read a couple of times, I wasn't there, but from people who were, that seemingly the 2 prior years, '78 when he won the won in Acapulco, and '79 when he did really well in Olympia, his pecs were really full. They kind of flattened out. They almost like they regressed in '80. Was that from being overtrained or drawn out or something?
That's what I'm trying to tell you. I can only tell. The last time I saw him, he did not have that look. But according to the pictures, he was flat. His abs were sharp. His legs were good. I think what's overlooked in that contest, besides Mike, is the tremendous condition that at least a half dozen men were in that night. At Boyer Co. was amazing. Roger Walker was tremendous. Frank Zane, even though he was probably 10 or 15 pounds lighter because of the accident that he had around his pool, was sharp as a tack. Roy Callender was always sharp as a tack. There was a lot of great guys. Dickerson didn't have the elbows that he presented 2 years later in England, which I was again the head judge of, and except for Arnold, and it'll always be debated. Was Arnold at 80 or 90% of his best still the best? His legs certainly weren't. His triceps certainly weren't, but he was tall, and he was Arnold. Maybe not all of Arnold, but he was Arnold. So I'm not here to debate. I can tell you, if I judged that contest instead of recusing myself, but it was a matter of ethics.
Roger, wait, Roger. What would happen if you were to have judged that? What would have been the outcome?
I'm not going to go there with you, Michael. I wasn't there, but
You know what Boyer Co said though. You referenced Arnold at his best in 1974. Boyer did allow. He said, "Look, there's no way Arnold should have won this," but he said if he were in '74 condition, despite the fact that 6 years passed, he would have won hands down in that condition.
I spoke to Boyer subsequently, and I don't think Boyer thought that Arnold should place in the top 5. Roger Walker certainly didn't think that Arnold should place in the top 5. But it is what it is. I wasn't there, and it's really hard to talk about. But I bet you, if I was, the history of the sport would have changed.
I see. Okay.
Same thing in 1981. If I was I take responsibility for that greatest booing contest of all time because
Roger, you told me that. Why do you take responsibility for that, for Franco's win?
Because I wrote a letter to Ben Weider and copied it to Oscar State several months before that contest, stating that whether Arnold deserved to win or not, the IFBB's reputation was challenged by that win in Sydney. And if we wanted to restore the Mr. Olympia to where it should be, there can be no hitches in the 1981 contest. It's got to be beyond reproach. That is why I'm suggesting to you two today that two things that you change. One, do away with the point system. You want to have a placement system. There's too much pressure on judges who know these competitors to score these competitors too high. And that was a placement system. And two, do not go by the idea that you have to have 7 international judges. Choose the best possible judges you can have for this contest and let them judge it in your most critical year. And neither one of those two suggestions were followed. One, because Ben didn't want placing system, because still at that time he had grandiose objective of having bodybuilding as an Olympic sport, which in retrospect was probably never going to happen. And two, for whatever his own personal reasons were, he wanted to have judges from at least 4 or 5 different countries, which he wound up doing. So my suggestions, if I was a little bit stronger in my suggestions, one, things might have changed. The other thing that could have changed is there was a competitors meeting before the contest. And I was positive that these competitors, after 1980, were going to speak up about the judging panel. And they did not say one word. And I was just hoping that they would say something, but nothing was said. So in the contest, it was not rigged. In my years of experience, neither Jim Mannion or Joe Weider or Ben Weider, nobody ever interfered with me as a judge and told me what to do. But if you have a point system where there is a mandatory 20, but there can be 2 20s and 2 19s and 2 18s, you can find all these competitors stacked so closely at the top that almost anybody can win, and that's exactly what happened. The Italian judge had Franco with a perfect score.
Yeah, Franco policy, right.
And the Wales judge had Franco with a perfect score. And even if Jacques Blomart, the most experienced of all the judges, had Franco in 5th, his votes were negated, as well as one of Franco's judges of 20-20-20, but in the scheme of things, Franco wound up with the highest score. And oh my God, I knew this before the evening show. And I knew that this was going to be a complete disaster. So the day, which started out with me up on the stage with these competitors, speaking to them through their poses, and them listening to me, and them hitting their shots, and me telling them where to tense up and where to relax, it was going so good. Everything just fell apart that night. And that audience was sophisticated and smart, and they booed, and they justifiably booed.
Hey, Roger, even though you were taken, your attention was taken into directing the guys on stage, and you were focusing on that, and you didn't have the best purview because, you know, as a judge, you want to be sitting there facing them. But it's even still, were you kind of in your mind, did you kind of know where you thought everybody was going to land?
I saw the scores at each round, so I knew where everybody was going to land.
Oh,
I knew I could tell you today my selections. They were good. I put this in print, but to me, it was hard to fathom how good Danny Padilla was that day at 155 pounds, believe it or not. Yeah. I watched Danny from his AAU days, and even when he won the IFBB Mr. America, which was probably 180 or 185, he had long muscle bellies in every single major muscular structure. But he always carried, he was just always a little bit too heavy, in my opinion. Well, there was no body fat on this man. He was the lowest body fat by far of anybody in this contest, and his muscle bellies were still rich and full. I had him first place the entire time.
Wow.
And I had Tom Platz second, and Platz was the most muscular guy. I mean, his quads were the same, if not better, but his upper body improved tremendously. Still a little bit heavier in the legs than the upper body, and that's probably why he didn't win. But he was great, the best he ever was. Unfortunately, the year later, he tore his right bicep doing a set of dumbbell flies, by the way, which puts you in a very anatomically vulnerable position when you're.
I don't like them. I don't like them. Yeah.
Bad exercise. For all those who
Yes.
free weight aficionados listening, watch
Yes.
out for dumbbell flies.
Don't
Third
do it.
place, I had Roy Callender, who's always dynamite.
What a nice guy.
I had Dickerson fourth, and Franco and Josip Wilkoch tied for fifth. I think I was close, but c'est la vie. That's the way it goes.
You know, my friend Mike Katz was in that show, and Mike told me, you know, he said this publicly, that he couldn't see, you know, I appreciate you putting Franco tied for fifth, but some people would say, well, he shouldn't have been in the running at all because he only had half a body. In fact, Katz said, you know, Franco, they should have put in a wheelchair and threw like a plaid cover over his legs and just wheeled him out there, let him pose his upper body. That's how non-existent his legs were. And I know part of that was from injuring his knee at the World's Strongest Man competition or something. I mean, were they really that devoid of any development or cuts or separation?
It's not that they were small, but they weren't sharp. I mean, he couldn't stand next to these guys. His pecs, I mean, the strike, you know, he showed this unusual formation in pecs with the upper pec the way it was. Nobody else showed
Right.
it. And his abs were very, very sharp. And when Franco turned around, you can't question his back. He had a bad case of gyno on his right.
Oh, yeah.
He shouldn't have won. You know, I wrote a eulogy for him on my Facebook site after he passed away. And I spoke to Franco a year before this contest. And one night we drank wine together that I expressed. If anybody gets on my Facebook page at Roger Schwab, you can see it. But he was really a beautiful man. He was just a great guy. He loved to drink red wine. He was so friendly with Arnold. He always had a smile. He was intense. And when he passed away, I said, my last line, I said, dear Franco, you know, our world will always remember you with respect, or something like that. So I try to leave 1981 behind because he was amazing in 1976. He was amazing before then. He was a great guy, and it was just so unfortunate to hear about his death.
Roger, who's your best Mr. Olympia ever?
My best Mr. Olympia, and I will cut it off at 1982, my last year of involvement, was Arnold in 74 and Sergio in 72 in Essen, Germany.
Were you there for that?
No, but you had to see Sergio's pictures in 1972 to realize Sergio at his best. Subsequently, I think he tore the tendon in his left tricep, and he was never the same after his early years in the WBBG contest. But in 1972, what a contest this must have been, was Serge Nubret and Arnold and Sergio and Franco and Frank Zane in the same contest. If you love bodybuilding, you would have wanted to be a fly on the wall that night. Certainly not a head judge, but a fly on the wall. And I guess Arnold in Essen, Germany, think about it, would be hard to beat. But even
I've read that Arnold even has allowed, possibly Sergio should have beaten me. But one of the things he said, he arranged for the pre-judging to be conducted in front of dark walls, so Arnold would stand out more than Sergio.
I have a lot of respect for Arnold Schwarzenegger. He grew in his thinking and in his physique as the years went by. And as great as Sergio was in 72, to answer your question, I think Arnold Schwarzenegger in 1974 was the best physique I ever saw.
In 74.
Yeah. Now, the strongest bodybuilder I ever saw was Casey Viator.
Oh,
Casey
okay.
Viator was subhuman, or he was like an avenger. I mean, he was so
Like an Avenger.
strong. He was, you couldn't believe the weights that this man handled. The whole stack on the Nautilus machines, tremendously heavy weights on curls done in strict form. Just tremendously strong. Ray Mentzer was the second strongest guy I ever saw. They were
Wow.
both stronger than Mike.
No
And
kidding.
Mike was no slouch.
You know, I want to segue into your relationship with Arthur Jones, the creator of Nautilus. But just something popped into my head. We referenced Yates, and Dorian Yates said his favorite piece of equipment is the Nautilus pullover machine. He said everything is centrifugal to that in his training, believe it or not, even though, you don't really subscribe to, the way he built himself and whatnot.
No, I have tremendous respect for Dorian Yates. I mean, what he did, however he did it, he turned the page. He turned the page. He honestly turned the page in bodybuilding between 1992 and 1993. Nobody ever, in my opinion, showed the progress in 1 year through whatever means that he did. And I am right in his corner as far as the Nautilus pullover machine. Arthur Jones, love him or hate him, what he did in a thoughtful, scientific way was try to find exercises that followed the function of the muscles on the body. And being Dr. Fozzie Dusa, you do know that the function of the latissimus is to draw the humerus down past the torso, at least one of the functions. And that was, he developed a machine for the lats that did not bring the weaker muscle of the biceps into play. And Dorian got it. Believe it or not, Arnold Schwarzenegger got it too. And when I watched Arnold train at Gold's Gym all those many years ago, the Nautilus pullover was always included in his workout. And he used to superset that with bent over rows.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Little tidbits. I saw them all train, and Arnold moved the weights a little faster than I would, but he was a strong guy. You had to watch Dave Draper squat. People complained that Draper's legs never came up to his upper body. Dave Draper squatted really heavy and hard. He just didn't have the genetic potential and the length of muscle belly in his quads that the other guys did. But if you saw Dave Draper at the 1970 NABBA Mr. Universe, where he placed third to Arnold and behind Reg Park, who was very, very light at the time, Draper could have won that contest.
I thought so, from what I saw.
And speaking of Reg Park, I watched Reg Park train, believe it or not, way back in the late 1950s in Brooklyn with a guy named Marvin Eder. Do you remember him?
Yeah,
Mike?
of course. Yeah, very, very, plumber, very strong. Still alive.
Between the two of them, you had never seen anything like it. But Reg Park and Marvin Eder handling incline presses and weighted dips. Oh my God, these guys are tremendously strong men. It was just great. I mean, to see the way people trained. But you don't want to get hurt. So eventually those heavy poundages take a toll. Joint stress, as you know, joint stress accumulates silently over time. And all of a sudden, your right shoulder bothers you and say, you know what, I haven't done anything in 2 months.
Exactly.
It's not necessarily acute what you did yesterday. It's the sins of your past.
Yes.
Michael.
Your body is amazing in that its immune system will protect you from all kinds of goings on for a long period of time until it takes a rest one day. And then all these things come out, or maybe just one, and you're like, wow, where'd that come from? It's like it's been festering from, the wrong movement.
That's why in all my years with Arthur Jones.
Well, before you say that, let's start us off. How did you meet him, or how did you start interacting with Arthur?
Arthur Jones, after he left Africa and came to the United States, located himself in a little hamlet in Florida called Lake Helen. And as a matter of fact, Jim Mannion was one of the earliest people to go down there and train with him. subsequently, I got down there also. And the first time I met Arthur, and I was, an aspiring bodybuilder, my arms had responded, but the rest of my body, especially my quads, calves, never responded as such. And I said, Arthur, could you evaluate my physique? And he said, I can evaluate it without you even taking off anything. Your potential is zero. Zilch, nada, goose egg, Iziko, which he says is Zulu, nothing. Go into something else.
Really?
Yeah, he really did, because he said, if you want to be a meaningful bodybuilder, he said, Roger, some can and some can't. But that being said, I loved him. He was my mentor for 30 years. We spoke on the phone at least every other week for almost 30 years. We delved way, way off of physiques and bodybuilding. But I went through his stages of life with his wives, with his thinking, with his psychology. Arthur was about 5'7", and near the end, about 155 or 160 pounds. And he could make a man 6'2", 250 pounds, standing right in front of him, shake in his boots, because he had something psychologically, Michael, that very few people have. And I can't even measure it or tell you what it was. But when you spoke to Arthur, it was like you were there, you attended Arthur's lectures. You didn't really have to speak. He was speaking while he was smoking that Pall Mall, drinking that coffee, and he was speaking. And when Arthur Jones spoke, you listened to him. And he always physiologically made a tremendous amount of sense.
Let me ask you, when you first started dealing with him, see, to meet someone like that, and if I knew they were like that and I was young, I would be intimidated probably for a while at least, but that has to fall away eventually if you're going to have clear enough mind to learn from him. Did you finally get relaxed around him, or?
Well, what happened, Michael, is I bought a line of his equipment, and I started training people on his equipment and free weights, and people were stimulating response. We weren't seeing bodybuilders, although we did in 1977 develop the first women's bodybuilding club, I believe, in the country. Wow. And we went and we had about 24 women who went up and posed at Wayne DeMilla's second night of the champion.
Oh, wow.
And we were recognized. Stacy Bentley was in our group, and she went on, to become one of the finest women bodybuilders. We got very friendly with Lisa Lyon, who was really training at Gold's Gym, and Georgia Fudge and Claudia Wilburn and Kate Baxter. We knew them all, and they all knew us. But these were women who were training their hearts out hard 3 days a week, mostly on Nautilus machines with a couple of free weight exercises, especially squats and deadlifts thrown in. And we were stimulating response. And we were getting results on Nautilus machines, and people weren't getting hurt. And I was never there to tell people, don't do barbells. If you do barbells, stimulate tremendous response. You just have to understand, in my opinion, the consequences of doing heavy compound movements.
Well, wasn't Mentzer, despite using all the Nautilus, he was still big on squats, barbell squats?
Yeah, yes, he was. But he wasn't doing 6-rep squats. He was doing 20-rep squats.
Oh, okay, so higher. And let me ask you, I wanted to ask this earlier. What are your thoughts on, since we get older, hopefully we age without getting old, sarcopenia and training the lower extremities and high reps versus low reps? Is there a solution to that, or is it something that can't be escaped?
I think the stereotype is as you get older, the first muscle groups to suffer are the legs. Certainly, if you see older bodybuilders today, even Robbie Robinson, who, if you see him, he's my age, and Robbie is just tremendous. You don't see too many pictures of his legs, and I would imagine you can't train your legs at that age like you did when you were younger. Robbie's certainly not going to start squatting with 300 or 400 pounds. So you imagine there's a certain amount of sarcopenia or atrophy occurring as you hit 40, 50 years old, so forth and so on. And it's probably, the stereotype's probably correct because it's harder to train your legs harder as you get older. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Oh, I do agree, yes.
So, as you get older, you try to train smart and you try to train with intensity. And to me, Arthur Jones used to always say, especially on a single joint movement, a muscle can contract hard for about 60 seconds. So if you're doing a count of about 3-3 or 4-4, it always falls in the 8 to 10 category or 6 to 10. I don't think anybody should ever be attempting singles or doubles. I think you're demonstrating your strength, but I think orthopedically you're asking for trouble. And you've got to question yourself, is your strength worth the orthopedic cost eventually? In my mind, the answer is no. So slow your reps down because there's less impact forces and keep your reps in a safe zone, which to me is someplace for the upper body of maybe 6 to 10 and the lower body maybe slightly higher.
Roger,
keep on lifting.
How do you or even Arthur define intensity?
Arthur defined intensity as your momentary muscular ability. That does not mean a single repetition trained as hard as you could. It means after a series, strength to Arthur is the force of muscular contraction as filtered through the joint system, meaning that your intensity could be high, but your force could be low if you're doing several repetitions before your intense reps. So a smart bodybuilder will take a weight that they can handle is quite light. The second rep a little bit harder. By the time you 8 to 10 repetitions, it's very hard. But they're actually the safest reps because you don't have the force production if your form is good in those last couple of reps to hurt yourself. But in my opinion, and Arthur's opinion, it's those last several reps that stimulate the response. But not only are you trying to stimulate, it's the rest after the workout that allows the response. So how do you know when to train again? By trial and error, you wait until you think that you can be stronger at the next workout. If you're staying at stasis or getting weaker, chances are you're not recovering from the stimulus. And to me, that's the whole cause and effect of progressive training for the average guy. And our conversation today, as far as training, not about the bodybuilders, are trainees who are naturals, or rather who are not taking drugs, who are natural. We're all bodybuilders. We're all bodybuilders.
Correct.
But we're not drug taking. And I don't sit here criticizing the men who thought they were going to make their livelihood taking drugs. That is their business.
Right.
But to the people who I'm trying to address, to Michael Dusa and to John Hansen and to Randy Roach, are guys who want to train hard and realize their own physical potential, but doing it in a medically sound way.
Let me ask you, Arthur Jones, what background did he have to have the proclivity to be able to develop all the engineering that went behind Nautilus? I mean, did he have any help, or was that just something he came up with and worked on for years and years? And why training? Because he was into safaris and movie production and all these other things.
I think one of Arthur's loves, besides the importing and exporting of wild cargo and animals of all types and reptiles, was bodybuilding. He was a bodybuilder at heart. He loved training, and he trained very, very hard. He used to train, he would tell everybody 4 times a week, 12 exercises in the workout, 4 sets, 48 exercises, total sets. And as he reduced and reduced and reduced it, he saw that his body got stronger and got bigger. And so you had to know Arthur from when he was younger. His IQ, Michael, was way off the charts. He was just a brilliant man. I mean, he was an avid reader. He spoke many different languages. His whole family was medical doctors. He was brilliant from a young age, and weight training just was one of his passions. And in the 1940s, when he was in his early 20s, he trained at the West Coast at one of Vic Tanny's gyms. And Vic Tanny would always say of anybody who he ever saw train, Arthur made the fastest results.
Okay.
But for Arthur, those results weren't good enough. And he would never have invented Nautilus machines if his torso responded the same way as his legs or his arms did. So his arms were big. His calves were like Steve Reeves' calves.
Wow.
But he didn't have big lats. So he set out to find a direct way to work those lats. And that's where he came up with the Nautilus pullover machine. Arthur's machines can be criticized, but Arthur's machines are rarely criticized by people who experienced the experience. The people who took the time to train correctly on Arthur's machines would stimulate a response. They weren't popular amongst the bodybuilders per se, the Gold's Gyms guys, but why should they be? They were responding from barbells,
Right.
and they were getting great response. Did they need these big contraptions? They didn't think that they did. Who am I to criticize? I saw the Nautilus machines in Gold's Gym sit there and collect dust, but I also saw Nautilus machines at work by people like the Mentzers and Casey Viator and Arnold Schwarzenegger and even Franco when he was down in Florida. Those machines work. Barbells work. Everything works.
Was Arthur as I don't know if the word's forgiving as you are as far as going either way or was he totally dismissive of people who just went with free weights and didn't want anything to do with Nautilus?
In front of me and all of my years of conversation with Arthur Jones, he never said a bad thing about free weights.
Wow.
Arthur just thought that a barbell was the next step. That's all. And since when I started X-Force in 2012 in this country, X-Force is just the next step from Nautilus machines. That's all.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that. David Bachman, good member, never was really comfortable with the one cycle being enough with Nautilus. I was a member at Nautilus for 4 years, so maybe he's just different. What would you say, Roger?
Again, David, try something that works for you. Again, you have to understand yourself, and yet by trial and error, be your own worst critic. But if you find instead of a Nautilus machine, a barbell bench press works better than Nautilus chest press, do it. If you find squats work better than a Nautilus leg press, do it. Don't be locked into something if it's not working for you. But at least you experience the experience, and you can talk about it. So move on, move in a different way. Just, in my opinion, keep it a safe way. That's all.
Let's segue into your system X-Force that you developed. And,
I did not develop X-Force. I brought it to this country.
Oh, I'm sorry. Even still, I associate you directly with it. Just to start off, would you say a lot of people who are new to X-Force lend themselves to the dogma and they're not able to release themselves from the old, paradigms that they've grasped as far as doing too much or?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, Arthur Jones, and this has been, science has shown this, that a muscle has 3 levels of strength. Your concentric strength, your lifting strength, concentric movement, eccentric movement, which is your lowering strength, and static strength. Your weakest of the 3 is lifting. Static is midway in the middle, and your strongest strength is lowering. Arthur believed this had something to do with the friction in a muscle. friction hurting you in the lifting part and friction helping you in the lowering part. So your real true strength is static strength, where there is no friction involved. However, it was shown that a fresh muscle is 40% stronger in the eccentric movement than it is the concentric movement. Meaning, if you can push 100 pounds over your head once in control, you can lower 140 pounds in control. So an X-Force machine gives you 40% heavier resistance on the negative or lowering part of the resistance, which makes the inroad into your starting strength deeper than that of a barbell or a Nautilus machine. Thus, your intensity is greater, but your recovery time is longer. So most of the people who train on X-Force, and by the way, X-Force is only available in several places in the States, although it's available on the continent in Europe much more, but the cost of the machines are somewhat prohibitive besides the shipping. So I don't think you're going to be seeing X-Force machines prevalent in the United States. So to talk about
who developed them, Roger?
X-Force was developed by engineers in Sweden, a fellow by the name of Mats Tulin, an engineer by the name of David Berglund, and an orthopedic surgeon named Bjorn Alber. And after years of work, they showed them in the United States. They didn't go over overly well in the States when they were shown, because most people don't want to spend $10,000 for a piece of equipment. At my age, and after I was been in business for a long period of time and being fascinated by the equipment, I went over to Sweden to see it, worked on some of the cams with the engineers, was very happy with the product, had them shipped to the United States in 2012, and have been teaching these machines ever since. And I will tell you again that anybody who's experienced the experience loves them. I put Victor Martinez, who Victor Martinez, on an X-Force machine, and he did one repetition of a rowing machine and said, "This, my friend, is a game changer." Now, is Victor Martinez going to stop lifting barbells and rush to do X-Force? No, because he's been successful, and he doesn't really need the added stimulus or inroad that X-Force gives you. He's plenty fine with the tool that he has. I think X-Force is a technological breakthrough, but to talk about it to your listeners, it's probably meaningless because most people won't have a chance to try it. But if any of your listeners are interested, they are my guests as well as you, Michael.
I'm coming down.
You are coming to Philadelphia. You are my guest for a session on X-Force. And then you are free to write about it any which way you want. But to this day, there has been nobody who's experienced the experience under my supervision who has not been greatly impressed. And I am just a user of the equipment. I didn't develop it. I didn't develop Nautilus or Med-X or barbells. Everything works, but you have to do it in a medically sound way. So you can be lifting at my age at 77 and still have arms that are big, if you can see.
Well, let's see this. Let's see this. Wow, look at that. 77.
At 77.
Now I don't have to go to Spain because you just brought me the Rock of Gibraltar.
So they're not as big as your picture with me and Mike standing there, but it's 40 years later also. And
Mark Pacheco, who's a good friend, he owns a great gym in California. He compliments both of us. As always, amazing guest, fantastic host, great show. Thanks, Mark.
And thank you, Mark.
What a historical treasure trove, tremendous interview. Bill, Roger's like a time capsule, man. He really is. He's been through every page. It's like all the pages of Muscle Builder. Let me ask you something, Roger. People really want to know how is the system good for longevity? And I know it's a kind of a broad question, but maybe in general terms. And then we have a few more questions here. People are starting to come on.
Again, I don't think it's the tool. I think it's stimulus, rest to recover, and I think it applies to everybody. you have to separate the physiological from the psychological. A lot of bodybuilders like me and you love it, and there's nothing like the feel in the gym, and there's nothing like the pump. And you want to be in there, and you want to be in there the next day and the next day and the next day. But you have to wonder to yourself, if you understand the indirect effect of the body and the nervous system, and if you work your upper body, do you really think your lower body is recovering? The body is a unit. You sleep your body as a unit. You feed your body as a unit. In my opinion, you should train your body as a unit. Some people won't buy into a full body workout. And if you don't, if you want to do a split routine and it works for you, do it. But give yourself some days off. And if you're doing bench press with 225 pounds and you're getting 8 reps, and a week later you're at 8 reps, and 2 weeks later you're at 8 reps, and a month later you're at 8 reps, look at yourself a little bit and try to find some way you're getting that 9th rep or that 10th rep. You are training to get stronger. At least to me, that's what bodybuilding has always been. I've always gone into the gym to try to stimulate a response. And to me, rest allows that response.
Let me see here. Roger, did you know Gordon Asak? He started one of the first Nautilus gyms in Massachusetts in 76, 77. TGA Nautilus, Brockton, Mass. He operated his gym until he passed away in 2017.
Thank you, Robert. But no, I didn't. I knew Dave Masterakis trained up in Massachusetts.
Okay. Yep.
Joe Mullen did also. So I don't know the fellow you're talking about, but hopefully you stimulated some response under his tutelage.
You got Ed Neebs here. I agree with this concept about finding what works for you. When I won the Mr. Florida middleweight class, I improved my chest dramatically by using a chest press machine instead of a barbell bench. Felt more direct stimulation on my chest from the machine. Sometimes you have to think outside the box. So
there's a smart guy. So there's a guy who thought outside the box and found out what worked for him. And it could have been just the opposite. You know, he might have found better results with a bench barbell, but he was looking for something, and he looked enough that he found what worked for him.
Another Mike Mentzer question. How much did Mike weigh at his best? One of my favorite bodybuilders.
When he trained at my gym, he was between 218 and 225.
Was that right before the 80 Olympia, by the way, Roger?
I think he was at his heaviest in 1979. John Little would know that better than me, I think. That's the heaviest I saw him. He looked as heavy as in 1979. But in 1980, he was right there. He couldn't have lost that much. Again, he looked to me a little dehydrated. He had flattened out a little bit. I don't know why.
Unsure of that.
I think he was best 220s. Then again, Frank Zane was best at 189, 190. So that's 30 pounds less.
Yeah, and in fact, what was Mike? 5'7", 5'8" in height?
Yeah, Frank was taller. And I'll tell you another thing about Frank Zane. People always say, well, Frank Zane, he really realized his potential as an ectomorph. He was no ectomorph. He might be an ectomorph, you know, to some of these really big guys, but he had tremendous muscle bellies in his quads. His vastus lateralis went all the way down to the knee. His calves were deep. His pecs. How many people ever showed pecs, fullness of his pecs with his hands over his head?
Yeah,
he could do it. His serratus, his abs, his delts. He was a mesomorph, and he just knew how. He knew how to dial it in, boy, and he did.
I don't think people realize how good his thighs were, actually, if you really look at them. And I, like you, I've seen him in person. I've trained with him and whatnot. And of course, he's got the leg blaster. He probably attributed to that, which I use actually. It really saves the back and the knees and things like that. He's pretty. I guess he's sold quite a few of those. You're familiar with that, right? The leg blaster.
Sure. I'll tell you a real quick, interesting story if you'd like to hear it. In 1976, in New York, in the elite circles of art appreciation, the Whitney Museum, which is one of the great art museums in the country, had Ed Corney, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and Frank Zane pose in the Whitney Museum to some of the real highbrow in New York City.
Yeah.
John Balick and I, John is a close personal friend, and I went with them to the Whitney Museum. Corney was in dynamite shape. And Corney looked just great. Arnold was Arnold, but much softer than the great Arnold. Frank Zane looked to me like he couldn't win Mr. Pennsylvania. I said, he had just placed second to Franco in the Mr. Olympia in '76. I said, Frank Zane's not only not going to win in 1997 or 1977, he's not even going to enter the contest.
Oh.
Well, I was at the contest in '77, and Frank Zane was at his all-time best. And that's when I started to realize, oh my God, these guys who want to know how to dial it in the last minute. And it's probably not just the...
You know what Frank Zane always said, because he was never that impressive in the gym or giving a seminar or in a locker room or walking around in clothes, and someone took him to task on that, and he simply said, listen, I only have to beat you on one day, which is, on the contest day. So he wasn't concerned with, carrying all this extra. He was the first guy. He was telling me that he would eat up to 200 amino acid caplets a day, which would account for over 1/3 of his food calories, but he wouldn't, occupy space. He was able to keep his stomach very trim because it wasn't food.
That's really interesting that you say that. The last interview I gave for Iron Man magazine to Lonnie Teeper, it was a double interview. One was with Larry Scott and one was me. This is Larry when he was older. Now, you can be sure that most people wanted to hear that interview with Larry Scott, but instead of me, and understandably and justifiably so. But Larry did honestly take very heavy quantities of Blair's protein with heavy whipping cream.
Yes.
And he told me at the time, I guess it was his metabolism, but he said to me, Roger, I swear as I'm standing here today, in 1964, I was taking a cup of this stuff a day with not milk, not skim milk, heavy whipping cream. And he's saying to me, I was getting leaner and fuller, and and he was absolutely fantastic. And you take that Larry Scott built in 1964 and 65. It was like John Grimmick. People talk about John Grimmick today, oh, he wasn't so hot. But if you ever saw John Grimmick in the flesh, nobody ever saw him, thought that. Maybe today seeing his pictures. But John, every muscle group was round and muscles. He wasn't stringy. He was round, full muscles. And Larry Scott was the same way. You almost had to see them to believe them. That's how good they were. And this is the 1960s. And with Grimmick, the 1950s. And with Park, the 1950s. And Steve Reeves, 1940s with Grimmick in 1940s. These guys were really tremendous physiques. Not bloated, not with the big bellies, but the kind of, to me, that was bodybuilding. That's what you aspire to.
And in fact, I know Reeves anyhow was 3-day per week total body workout, right?
That's all. Well, Vic Tanny's gym back then, it was only open for 3 days a week. So you trained 3 days a week. This is how the guys learned.
Yeah, 3 days a week for the men and then the other 3 days for the women.
Yeah. Grimmick, when I knew Grimmick, and I used to watch Grimmick train in the York Barbell Gym, and again, up until his later years when he really started suffering from his joint and he had hip replacement, he could still squat when he was in his 70s at 400 plus pounds. Wow. Not half squats, Michael.
Real.
Ass to the ground squats.
Wow.
I mean, with a smile on his face. You have to know this man. And the biceps, these were the nicest guys in the world. There was no haters back. They were just great, great guys.
Did you have any dealings with Bob Hoffman at all?
No, I knew him to see him and to say hello to him, but he never was in the gym when I was in there. This was back in the days that Steve Stanko was in there. And some of the great lifters, Bob Bednarski, Phil Crapoli, I think, just tremendous. They were weightlifters, but they were all bodybuilders. I mean, they all tried to build big muscles. The bigger you are, the stronger you're going to be, everything else being equal.
You would hope. Yeah. I never got the size or the strength. There was one time when if you had me at the right angle, light, 500 yards away, it looked like maybe.
I saw those.
You would think I was probably raking leaves vigorously, and that's where the stimulation was coming from. So going forward, now your son runs X-Force now, is that correct?
My son, my wife, and myself.
That's great. Now your son was he a bodybuilder at all also, or how was he growing up?
My son was involved in filmmaking, and to continue his career, he would have had to move to LA to do it. And he was just getting married and having a family. And I had this wild idea, Jesse. I said, there's a type of equipment that I really think for a lawyer or a doctor who's somebody who has limited amount of time, who wants to train hard, we can really make a difference in Philadelphia. And he said, you count me in. And now we train about 130 people a week, once a week. Some people would want to train more than once a week. We let them train as often as they want, but if you train hard on X-Force, it takes a lot out of you, and it's really.
So Roger, what you're saying is those 130 work out once a week with you.
We'll see about 20 people a day, six days a week.
But I'm talking about individually. Like if I were a member.
Everything is one-on-one. There is no group.
No. Yeah. What I'm saying is I would train once a week.
Yes, in my opinion, although you could do it as much as you want.
No.
When you come and visit me, Michael, you'll make that decision.
No, listen, I am one thing. I do not lend myself to dogma. I keep an open mind. I know very little. That's why I surround myself with really smart guys like you every single day. And well, we will come down. We're only 3.5 hours away, so I can even decide to come down tomorrow. I'll let you know first.
You are my guest.
Don't get it on video. Got to be on video, or it didn't happen. Hey, I really want to thank you, Roger. This was a lot of fun. You illuminated quite a bit, and your words carry heft because you were there. And plus, in your August years, if you were my patient, I'd open the chart and I'd write the patient appears much younger than stated age. So that's part of good health, projecting. And you feel good. You still feel good. You still feel energetic, strong. You still work out.
I still train as hard as I can.
You do. Yeah, you look great, man. That's quite an arm you got on there.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. And thanks to your audience. And tell them I'm very easy to get in touch with. So they look to Philadelphia and they find me. I'd be happy to talk to anybody. And there are no secrets.
Roger, is there a site they could is there an address or a site or something you can give me that I could type in here for the people?
Yeah, it's my Facebook page, which is just Roger Schwab, I guess. I don't know. If they're on Facebook, I guess, anybody under 30 isn't on that. They can find me, or on X-Force's website, www.xforcephiladelphia.com. You can definitely get me. Or just, email me. They can get it through you, Michael, because you know how to get it.
No, they'll. Yeah, I am the conduit here, which is fine. I talk to a lot of different people every single day. Only occasionally somebody wants to break me in two, and then I tell them, well, then there'll be two of me. That's a problem. Roger, I want to thank you. It's been a lot of fun, but no, seriously, I'll come down. I'd like to try it out. I'll let you know beforehand, and even my wife, Assistant Attorney General here, she won a few contests back in the day, and she could still put me under the table training-wise. So
I respect you, and I respect your podcast. Most of all, I respect your passion and keeping the whole thing alive. And with some of the things that call themselves fitness these days, it's good to be able to talk about common sense in a field where common sense is not always common.
Not so common anymore. Hey, your words lift me. And it's been a tough week with my dog being gone and all that, but it's good having problems. That means you're alive. And I say, choose life. And I'll end with my favorite line: all will be well, because if not, why even get out of bed? You hear these people so sour about things. I'm like, well, why are you here? Because I don't think they believe that.
Yeah, every day is a blessing.
Yeah. Well, I wake up, I've won lotto, although my bank account doesn't show that. But Roger, thanks again. And listen, we'll have Roy Callender here, everybody. Thank you for your kind questions. I want to thank Roger Schwab once again. He is a luminary, and his time, like everyone, is very, very valuable, and he shared it with us, and has shared mostly the pearls of wisdom that come with information. That's the most important thing. So everybody, I hope you got something out of this. I'll see you later in the week with Roy Callender. Thoughts, questions, comments, considerations are always welcome, and we will bid you good night. Thanks, Roger.
Thank you, Michael.
Good night, everybody.